Hey guys, Eric Smith here, 5 Reasons Sports contributor, also co-host of Scouting the Fins, which you can find on the 3 Yards Per Carry podcast feed and also the 5 Reasons YouTube channel. This video is not necessarily going to be a all-inclusive play-by-play of today's practice. This is more so just my experience and some of the things that stuck out to me. I was fortunate enough to get a media pass for today, which added to my experience for my first trip to Miami Dolphins training camp practice. I was also able to sit in on press availabilities for Mike McDaniel, Pharaoh Brown, KJ Britt, Tyreek Hill, and Daniel Brunskill, who I was able to ask a question to. You can find that video under my profile on X. It was neat, right? Very nice facility. And before practice, we got to sit in on Mike McDaniel's press conference. Not really going to go into the details of what was said there. That's available on the team's YouTube channel if you want to check it out. As I said on my 5 Reasons video with Ethan Skolnick, Mike McDaniel's humor and mannerisms, I think they're a little easier to take in person than the vibe that you get when you're watching him on a TV or a computer. After that availability, we went out to the practice field. And as usual, when the team comes out, there's a group that's responsible for fan engagement. And today that was Quinn Ewers and the quarterbacks. And he went over and tossed some footballs into the stands to the fans, and they had to try to throw them back into a net on the field. From there, they go into their stretching and their individual drills. And I know, and I said, in the video that I did the other day, that I was going to try to focus on things other than the offensive line, and that didn't happen. So as I was watching the offensive and defensive line one-on-ones, I was using a voice recorder to keep track of the matchups. And after I got back here to my Airbnb, I went through and played it and charted it out. And almost everyone both won and lost reps during that period. It was fairly even matched overall, and most players only got 2 or 3 reps total. I'd say that a couple of the guys who stood out to me during this session were Patrick Paul, first off. He took the most reps of any offensive lineman and pitched a shutout. His last rep versus Chop Robinson was his closest to a loss, but I still felt like he did a good job that would have given the quarterback the ability to fairly easily avoid a pressure in that situation. Matt Dickerson was another one. He had a couple of really nice, quick A-gap pressures. Larry Borum pitched a clean slate, but that also wasn't against the top pass rushers on the roster. Keon Smith was one that had a rough period, and that also wasn't against the top talent like the Zach Sealers or the Kenneth Grants. So that wasn't great to see. Zach Sealer took 1 rep from each side. Wouldn't call either of them really wins, but he then showed up in the team drill as you would expect. Talking about those team periods, I didn't take a lot of notes through those. Definitely some good stuff from both sides of the ball. And you can find more specifics on that, checking out either Travis Wingfield or Alf Artiaga's camp reports. I was sitting next to both of them during the practice. During those team periods, most of the time you only get, maybe 5 or 10 reps for each unit, right? First, second, third string. And, whether those are red zone, neutral field position, or 3rd and 1, those plays are all already scripted ahead of practice, and the emphasis isn't necessarily known, and there's not a ton of sequencing plays like you'll see in the flow of a game. So in general, I try not to read too much into those periods because, from the team's perspective, it's not necessarily the success or failure of the play. It's getting those plays on film so that they can then go back and review them once they're back into the facility. Just some general observations overall of the position groups. Running backs, I thought that Alexander Madison could be the odd man out when it came down to 53-man cuts or maybe who was on the active roster for game day, but based on how he was used in practice today, he seems to be, carving out a pretty firm role of where he will be able to contribute during the regular season. Early in a red zone period, they tried to hit Alec Ingold on a wheel route where they had gotten him matched up versus Jalen Phillips in man coverage. Ingold stretched out. He wasn't able to bring it in, but it was a flashback to, I think, the first season that Ingold was here when it seemed like they were trying to incorporate him more as a legitimate part of the passing game compared to what they did with him last season. Wide receivers, D. Eskridge won on a deep route during the team period. He wasn't able to haul that one in. Theo Weiss had a nice catch in the back of the end zone. And then Nick Westbrook-Akine had a nice block on a run by Tyreek Hill that ended up with a touchdown. Tight ends don't have much here, but Pharaoh Brown is big. Like, he's only listed as an inch taller and 9 pounds heavier than Julian Hill on the roster. But when those two guys stand next to each other, there's a very noticeable difference in their size. Offensive line was probably about what I expected, both from a positive and a negative perspective. I had asked Alf on Wednesday's 3 yards per carry camp summary who the second most important player on the Dolphins roster was, and he said Patrick Paul. And I tend to agree with that. Paul is trending towards one of those players that you literally say, you handle the edge rusher on your side, and we'll figure out the rest of it. And when you have somebody like that, it really changes what you're able to do from a protection standpoint when you can put that much faith into, one of your guys that's on the edge. Andrew Meyer continues to hold up well. Aaron Brewer was working on the side with his helmet. He continues to look, and it sounds as if he's close to starting practice. As Travis Wingfield pointed out to me, Brewer did miss a good chunk of training camp last season with a hand injury, and he was able to slide in pretty seamlessly, so I'm not worried about that one. Defensive line didn't have many notes here, but Sealer did break through the line and forced a fumble almost at the mesh point on one play that was scooped up, I believe, by Bradley Chubb, who then jogged it to the end zone. Edge players, we've seen it in the past some, but this seems to be another season where Jalen Phillips is really being groomed as the guy that allows your defense to be flexible in what they do, at least from a front seven perspective. And Zach Sealer's another one that wears multiple hats on the defense, and neither of those should come as a surprise to anyone. Linebackers didn't have much that stood out specifically. Jordan Brooks was the orange jersey player of the day. There was a play late in practice during the 3rd and 1 period where there was a thump at the line of scrimmage that could be heard in the stands. I think it was KJ Britt that was on the defensive side of that. Defensive backs. So, you had wins and losses throughout the day from that group. But after seeing them in person, I'd say I'm slightly less concerned than I was before I saw them at practice. And it's not so much the plays that they're making. It's more so the, being able to see how they're being used and how you can see that translate into a game where some of these guys are players who might not come out and get you game-winning plays, but they're also not necessarily going to leave you with game-losing plays either. All you have to do is to keep your head above at the cornerback position, above the water, and let the other stronger units on the defense be the ones that change the game. All right, I'm not sure if I'll have a media pass for tomorrow, but I'll be at practice either way before I head back to Pennsylvania on my flight tomorrow night. I'll be checked out of my Airbnb before practice, so I'm not sure how much of a practice review I will do. That may depend on how well this one is received. As always, I appreciate you guys checking this out, and we'll talk again soon.